Welcome back, everybody, to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay. Today, we're going to learn together a little bit about check brain lines, and I'm going to use a lot of car references on this video. But the main idea of this video is to maybe identify some of those like early warning signs, especially with people with brain injury. It'd be kind of good to know what are their limitations and what are the things we should be looking for. I, like probably everyone here who's listening out or watching this video, have that one friend who has that, um, shall we say, experienced car that has all of these lights on. And so I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about brain engine lights. Maybe you should check your brain light. Um, Again, the mechanics for that are a little bit different. They typically wear lab coats and stethoscopes, not necessarily, coveralls and covered in grease. So, but with that being said, I do appreciate it when you like this video. Feel free to drop a comment down below. Maybe there's a check engine light that I forgot. Um, and maybe leave a comment about those check engine lights, but we also appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. That way you can enjoy this informational yet applicable content that we put out every week. So with that being said, let's talk about those check the brain lights. So there's a few ways we can look at this, but let's start with the mental fatigue, right? We see that in some cases, when your mind is like mentally drained, you're going to see decreased productivity, maybe decreased performance. My typing is probably going to be a lot slower and a lot less accurate when I am physically and mentally exhausted. Especially after a long day at work, I'm going to have to use that backspace button a lot. And so think about that as like maybe, okay, maybe check the tire pressure in your front right tire. Maybe after a long, mentally taxing day, maybe I just can't concentrate quite as much. Maybe that's why maybe we should have the discussion of ending, non-daylight savings times. That way we can have the sun out when we're driving home from work, when we are tired. So again, concentration is another one of those mental factors that very much involves the brain. We'll also see slowed responses. So if someone were to ask me, like, "Hey Jay, did you do X, Y, or Z?" And maybe I have to think about it. That's a little bit of mental fatigue going on there. And that's probably my body's way of saying, listen, I'm already worn out. We've already gone through the tank of gas. So this is probably hey, you need to refill your tank of gas light here. We see mental and physical that agitation. Maybe I'm sputtering out for the day. Um, you know, Maybe that agitation is something that maybe is connected to that mental fatigue. And it's not necessarily just enough to say, well, oh, he's just overworked. No, maybe you are overworked. Maybe you're mentally fatigued, and maybe you should address it at a later time when you're not mentally fatigued. We'll also see a few emotions, like maybe someone is anxious. Maybe there's some angst in them. Maybe that pent up, like stored up stress. Also, being stressed can be one of those emotions as well. But we also see, according to this source down here, which you'll find in the description below as well, like all the rest of the sources, we encourage you to look these up, that it is quite possibly linked to brain injury or traumatic brain injury. They really did stress traumatic brain injury being a cause of these things above. Like, okay, this might be what's manifesting the slowed response. Maybe it's because that the brain is injured and we shouldn't expect it to perform at 100% right away, right after a brain injury, especially concussions. So keep that in mind moving forward. If you damaged one of the cylinders on your car, do you expect it to run 100%? Or maybe one of the coils is going bad. Um, you can't really run it at 100% without all the parts in good working order. So if one cylinder is just not firing correctly, well, maybe you need to take that to a mechanic. And the same thing kind of applies to our brain. Maybe we need to rest it. Maybe we need to maybe address something in there, or maybe there's been an injury. And so you can't expect that engine to function at 100% once there's been an injury there. So the same thing applies to our brain. But with that being said, let's continue. Emotional fatigue. I'm separating this out from the mental fatigue because that's more cognitive. This is more behavioral. So let's look at emotional fatigue because let's think about that service, the engine soon sign there. We have that friend who has one of those vehicles where that light is always on. But let's talk about kind of how our bodies might manifest this check brain light in the emotions department. Well, you might become more irritable, or maybe you're becoming more irritable quickly, or maybe you're becoming irritable over small things that you weren't irritable prior to. Okay, that's interesting. Well, maybe when I say temperature, in this case, I'm not saying physically, I'm saying mental or emotional temperature. Maybe your temper is increasing. And so think about it metaphorically. Um, if a car does not have a working radiator, it's going to overheat. Maybe the radiator is out of fluid or low on fluid. Maybe it's not cooling it down enough. Maybe it's not scaling back that irritability before it gets to a point of explosion. And so that's why temperature matters. Mental and emotional temperature matters. That's kind of where we get the word temper as well. We might start to see aggression, or maybe contrary to like some physical stuff, we might see quick to respond. This kind of goes into like emotions of fear. Oh my gosh, what is going to happen? I need to get this project done. That's fear. And then we also see that tied into like the flight or fight response, which is kind of tied in with aggression, right? We see fight or flight. That is the sympathetic nervous system. And that can be quite tied to post-traumatic stress, which can be tied with traumatic brain injury. And this source down here really mentioned it with veterans. And so let's think about it's not just mentally, it's also emotionally, because you can be mentally tired and emotionally fine, but you can be emotionally tired and mentally fine. And so all of that is based in the brain. And that's a beauty about studying the brain is we are finding out more and more how the brain interacts with itself. All of these are chemicals running back and forth, and sometimes at varying degrees, sometimes outside of normal limits. And so knowing your like lights and sirens that are going off, maybe you're becoming irritable, maybe your temper rises, you become aggressive and quick. Maybe you have that fight or flight response, or maybe you start getting that post-traumatic stress. Okay, but this is linked in part either symptomatically or as a cause from traumatic brain injury. And that's not me saying it, that's the source. But I digress. Let's move on and let's talk about physical fatigue. Is this really a brain thing? Let's find out. So, we see with physical fatigue that usually there's a lack of sleep. Again, if you only sleep 4 hours a night, you're going to be physically drained. You haven't gotten that full 8 hours of good sleep in you, but you will need to rest. But maybe you have that lack of rest. Maybe you're in bed the whole 8 hours, but not sleeping the whole 8 hours. Maybe you have the TV on. Maybe you're distracted by a phone going off, someone sending you a message or an email at 2 o'clock in the morning. You need your rest. And so sleep hygiene can be a whole nother topic for a whole nother video, but we should also look at physical fatigue as part brain related as well. Because if you can't sleep, that could be a brain thing. Maybe your brain isn't going into rapid eye motion or REM sleep. Maybe it's not going into that non-REM sleep either, that like dreamy and then consequently non-dreamy state. We also see with physical fatigue, homeostasis changes, or maybe there's an alteration in your ability to maintain homeostasis, which includes body temperature. Think about the thalamus. Think about all these other organs that are kind of tied in with the thyroid system to regulate your body temperature. If you're overheating naturally, either due to a brain injury or due to something wrong with the thalamus or the thyroid, that can lead to physical fatigue. And so maybe that's one of those check brain lights there. We'll also see physical exhaustion. Maybe you're overworking yourself, maybe you're overburdening yourself physically, which puts stress on the brain. Well, we might also see quite the opposite, which is malaise or maybe a low motivation to do something. And that could be from physical fatigue as well, but that could also be tied into the mental, maybe the emotional, um, that motivational factor. Usually, under normal circumstances, you have the motivation to do things. And that could kind of tie with the decreased energy or maybe the decreased ability to be excited about something. Oh my, we're going on a trip to West Virginia. That excites me. I don't know about you. Put it in the comments section down below if you want to go to a trip on West Virginia. But usually I'm excited to go to West Virginia and see and do fun things there. But um, what if I wasn't excited about going to West Virginia? Would that be a check brain light? Maybe it's a physical fatigue factor. Maybe I just need a weekend to lay in bed and sleep. Who knows? But these are symptoms that can be caused by brain injury. A lot of traumatic brain injuries as well. And if you think about it, you hear some stories associated with traumatic brain injury. They don't sleep as well. Maybe their body changes, maybe their body chemistry changes, maybe they sweat much quicker, maybe they get tired much more quicker, maybe they get the exhaustion and they really don't want to be exhausted. So maybe that's part of the reason for the malaise. Maybe they're not excitable. Maybe they don't want to go on that trip to West Virginia. I don't know if you want to go to West Virginia. I do. But those are some symptoms of like physical fatigue manifesting via a brain injury. Maybe not, or vice versa, brain injury manifesting as physical fatigue. Wow, that is interesting stuff. But, anyways, what does this leave me as a brain injury case manager to conclude? Well, when I went through a certain class, there was a phrase that stuck with me. I'm going to credit that guy at some point, Dr. Giuliano. He said, know your buttons, which is know your trigger points. All right. There's certain things that will just get under your skin. And there's certain like check brain lights, check body lights that come on. All right. Rest is in fact very needed for healing and your overall health. You need to get a good night's sleep. There also might be some check brain lights. Again, that kind of ties in with knowing your buttons or knowing those triggers. But those are warnings. Take the warnings seriously. If something actually recurs, maybe figure out why. Maybe that's a check brain light. And also, when you know the warnings, you can address it early before it becomes a catastrophic failure. I would rather put more radiator fluid into a radiator on a car and address the leak if that is the case than have to replace the engine, the transmission, and everything because it overheated. Um, it would be better to change a tire before it got as bald as I am, than to get into a wreck because of it, or maybe run off the road because of a worn down tire. Maybe it's a good idea to get your mental and physical oil changes every now and then. How you might be asking, Jay, what is that? Mental and physical oil changes is when you take care of yourself. You do need to do your own self care. So do your own mental, physical, and maybe even emotional oil changes. If that means talking to somebody, talking to a friend or something, go for it. You know what? We do need our own body oil changes too. We got to make sure we're fueled right. See our nutrition video that will be coming out at some point. So again, fuel the body, but we do need our body oil changes. But with that being said, I believe that will conclude it for this episode. Those are my sources. They'll be down in the description below. I encourage you to read that. Feel free to like, subscribe, and put a comment down below. Maybe there's a button that maybe there's a mental or brain check engine light out there that you didn't know about. Or maybe there is one that you know about. Don't mention any names in the comments, but I'd love to hear your feedback. We always appreciate feedback. So, with that being said, everyone have a wonderful day and protect your brains.